Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Marisa Kazem, and today's video is going to be all the books that I've read in 2024 so far. So before I go into today's video, I'm just going to give a bit of an update on where I've been and what's going on with my life, because I haven't posted a video in like a year and 3 months or something like that, and I definitely need to give you guys something. I'm not just going to jump into a video. So I'm going to do that first. If you're new here and you just want to skip ahead to where I talk about the books, I will leave a timestamp somewhere here so that you can just skip ahead. Otherwise, for those of you that have wondered where I am, let's get into it. So the last video I posted on my channel was a January bullet journal setup, and that was, I think, January of 2023, and I loved the setup, and I did one for February as well, but I just couldn't keep up with it anymore. As you guys know, my bullet journals were very detailed and I did a lot of drawings and I was trying to do Disney themes, and unfortunately I just can't keep up with it anymore. In the past year and a few months, life has just been a bit hectic and kind of crazy for me, and I just haven't had time to bullet journal at all, so I've actually given it up, which does make me really sad because I loved doing it. I mean, you can go back and look at my videos. I loved doing those themes and creating them. It was really fun, but unfortunately, I just can't keep up anymore. I do really miss the benefit that bullet journaling gave me, and it was a wonderful hobby that I really loved, but I don't have time for it anymore, so I'm now gonna switch and just, I think my boyfriend came home, but I'm now just gonna switch and do more content that I can keep up with. And I'm always the kind of person who's wanted to post content based on my hobbies. I've been doing that since I was like 14 years old. I just like posting content online, and in the past year and a half I haven't really posted much. I've just posted on Instagram, which I will link in case you're curious, but basically my hobby has been just reading and writing. I started writing a book, and so I kind of just want to share that on my channel now, and that's what this is going to be about. For those of you that have stuck around and stayed here and left comments asking me if I'm okay for the past year, I really appreciate it. It's so heartwarming to see those kinds of comments, and I really do read all of them and I love them. The reason I haven't replied to any of them is because I felt like if I had to reply to a comment, then it meant like I owed a video coming soon, and I didn't want to do that. So I know that's crazy and it doesn't really make any sense, but that's where I've been. Life has just been kind of hectic, and the only hobby I'm able to keep up with right now is reading. So that's what I'm going to share on this channel. I have no guarantees for how often I'll be posting. I'm gonna post when I can and when I'm able to. And yeah, I hope you guys are curious and interested. I'm also planning on posting content about my writing. I'd really like to post like writing vlogs because I'm writing my own fantasy novel and I really want to get that out into the world and just share it. So I'm gonna try and do all of that the best that I can. And yeah, so hopefully you guys are interested and you want to follow along the journey. But for now, I just wanted to create a video of all the books I've read in 2024. I have read 9 books so far in 2024, 2 were audiobooks, 7 I've physically read. For January and February and March, I really didn't have much time to read it all, so it's a smaller amount of books for 3 months of the year, but I thought I'd just go through them anyway. So back in December, at the end of the year, I was actually moving. We're in a new apartment now, and so I had like no time to read, and in November I read a book that put me into a really bad reading slump, and I don't really want to go into it, but basically that's part of the reason why I haven't been able to read much. So when the year began, I decided to pick up Whalefall by Daniel Kraus. This is a thriller about a guy who goes in the sea and gets swallowed by a whale, and I thought that was very interesting. I was so in such a weird mood in the beginning of the year, and no fantasies or romances were interesting to me, and no murderous thrillers either. I just wanted to read something weird, and that's what this book is. It's very weird. Basically, the premise of this book is about this young guy. I think he's like 18 years old. He's very young. His father died like recently, like a year ago or something, and his father died at sea, and so they're like divers and whatnot, and basically he wants to go to the sea and swim and find his father's bones, I guess, father's remains. That's what this kid's plan is, and it's very strange, like not something you'd expect. And one thing that was really interesting is that each chapter, I don't know if it's too bright, but each chapter marks how much PSI, basically how much oxygen the kid has as he's going through this journey. And you are there right until there's no more oxygen. It's very interesting. And he basically has a very complicated relationship with his father. Like, you're not really expecting it, but it's very complicated, and you're reading like flashbacks from the past when he's with his family and his mother and a sibling, and then you're reading present day as he's like in the sea. And this whole book takes place in like an hour and a half, I think. I'm trying to remember. Okay, I think it's like an hour and a half or 2 hours. That's the entire duration of this book. It's like meant to be in real time, but you're just going through this kid's thoughts. And it was a very good book. I gave this 4 stars. I thought it was really well written, especially for being such like a serious topic. I wasn't expecting the grief to be written the way it was, because it's very complicated grief. And if you like reading complicated grief, I really recommend this book, because like I said, he's got issues with his father, but he's upset that his father passed away. And it's just a very good book, a very good thriller. And it is thrilling because you're not just reading about his relationships, you're literally reading about him trying to figure out how to get out of the whale and not die. So it's very crazy and all over the place. I thought it was a great thriller. I'd love to see something like this as a movie. It's definitely my kind of thing. I just love creepy, weird things like that. So if you're interested in something like that, I highly recommend. Okay, next, I read Never by Jessa Hastings. If you don't know, she is the author of the Magnolia Park series, and I love that series. It's a 5-star series for me, so I had to read her brand new romance. This is a Peter Pan retelling, but it's not what I thought it was. It's Wendy's like great granddaughter, and Peter Pan is still Peter Pan, but he's no longer like a 12-year-old boy. I don't know if he's meant to be 12 in the cartoon, but obviously he's young. In this one, Peter Pan did grow up a little bit, and he's meant to be like 23 years old. I think 23 or 21, something like that. That's how old he's meant to be. There's an explanation for why he was able to age a little bit. Like, it is in here, so if you're wondering about how that makes sense, it is in the book. And she's like 18 years old. And it's not just regular Captain Hook either. It's like Captain Hook's son. So there's like a lot going on in this book, and it's basically kind of like a love triangle situation, but I actually really loved it. Like, Jessa Hastings' writing, for one, is just incredible. Like, she knows how to keep you trapped in the story and just invested in the characters, even if not much is happening. Like, there was, like, I think weeks where barely anything was happening. It was just, like, conversations between the characters, but it was incredible. Like, if you want to read a very strange retelling of Peter Pan, I'd highly recommend this book. I gave this one 4 stars. The only reason it wasn't a 5-star for me was because there were a couple parts where it was just a little bit slow, and there was just one like plot thing. It wasn't really a plot thing, but it was just like, as the book was going on, it started to become really obvious what was going to happen, and I just wish she had left it so that we didn't know. I checked on her Instagram, and she actually said it was meant to be intentional, that like it's very obvious what's going to happen. So I'm glad that that was like her intention. It wasn't that like it was a mistake in her writing. It was definitely intentional, that it was kind of obvious to figure out the ending, but the ending definitely sets you up for the next book. I don't know when the next one's coming out. I don't know what it's called, but I will definitely be reading it because I just have to know what happens next. I love the characters. I love the story. If you love romance, but you love like awkward drama and tension and a Peter Pan retelling, I'd recommend. So the next book I read this month is Powerless by Lauren Roberts. This book has gotten so hyped up, and I obviously had to pick it up for myself and read it, and it is an interesting story. I heard a lot of people saying that this was like the Hunger Games, and I will say I agree in a way. I've never read the Hunger Games, I've only watched the movies, but the setup is very similar, where there's like trials going on and you don't really get a choice, like you're thrown into the trials. Our main character, Peyton, is very poor and homeless, and she, like, something happens and there's a reason she gets chosen, but she's chosen to go into the trials. She has to compete against all these competitors, and there are 2 princes, and one of the princes is the enforcer, and he's basically a murderer for a living, and he is in the trials and he's trying to win as well. There's a lot of romance going on between them. This is definitely more fantasy romance than it is fantasy. If you want an easy fantasy to read, I definitely recommend this, because the fantasy world is so simple. It's like there's a kingdom, there's people with powers, and there's people without powers, and the people with the powers are the ones who are rich and well off, and then the ones without powers are poor, or if they have lesser powers, they're struggling, and it's just basically like that's it. There isn't really much else to it, but it's just like so so interesting to read about. I loved their romance and their dynamic. Peyton was very cool. I loved her mentality about things. I loved her outfits. Oh, if you love a fantasy where the outfits are gorgeous, kind of like how they are in Caraval, definitely recommend that because it's in here. I gave this one 4 stars as well. The reason I couldn't give it 5 stars is just because I felt like there were some points in the plot where we kind of lost what was going on, or I feel like the one of the main characters wasn't doing what was expected of them. I don't want to give spoilers, but basically, like, I mean, there's romance, so you know, obviously they start becoming interested in each other, and Kai is the royal enforcer, and I feel like he very quickly became obsessed with Peyton and was just like all into her. But I think he's meant to be like 18, and like he's been training for 18 years to be a cold-hearted murderer, and I kind of wish we saw more of him being that cold-hearted murderer, because he's very much like, he sees Peyton and that's it. He's like all head over heels, and it's cute. It is cute, and I know it's YA, so obviously it's, you know, YA romances tend to not be so in-depth. I just wish we saw him kind of struggling more, like with his duties and like what the king expects of him, whereas he just kind of saw Peyton and was like, that's it, I'm in love. But it was cute. It was an amazing book. 4 stars. The ending was insane. I need the second book. I think it's coming out this month or like soon. It's definitely before the end of the year. The second book is coming out and I would definitely be reading it because I just have to know what is going to happen next, because now I feel like I'm thrown off the edge of my seat. I feel like a lot of this story, it was getting like predictable, like what was going to happen, but now that that ending happened, which did take me by surprise, I don't know where the story is going to go, so I'm really excited to pick up the next one. So next, I read A Curse for True Love by Stephanie Garber. I picked this up in November. I pre-ordered it to get it because I was so obsessed with Once Upon a Broken Heart and what's the other one called? The Ballad for Never Off. The Ballad of Never After? I think that's what it's called. Anyway, so that's why I had to pick up this one. The Ballad of Never After will always be a 5-star read for me. That book was incredible. This one, I wanted to love it. I gave it 4 stars. I was hoping for just a little more out of this book, and unfortunately it didn't give it. I saw so many other people saying similar things. Some people were rating it really low, like 2 stars, just because the book wasn't exactly what we wanted, and I don't agree with that. I think this was still very well written, but all of the romance that you loved in the second book kind of didn't continue in this book, which is the part that made me sad. And I am not a romance girly. I very much like reading anything. Like, I'm not overly obsessed into romance, but this series is like a romance fantasy. Like, you're not reading this just for the world, you're definitely reading this for the fantasy, and this just kind of went all over the place with some other characters, and it seems as if Stephanie Garber was trying to set up the characters so that she could maybe have a 3rd spin-off series, or I guess 2nd spin-off series, because this is the 1st spin-off. So I think she's gonna have a 2nd spin-off series about those other characters, and so they were kind of like crammed into this book at the end, like so many details, and it just wasn't what I wanted the series to be. What I loved about The Ballad of Never After was that there were so many like quiet secret moments between our 2 love interests, and it was just them like against the world. That was what that book felt like, and the ending of that book broke my heart. In this one, obviously I'm not going to tell you the ending of the second book because I don't want to give spoilers, but if you know what happens at the end of the second book, I kept thinking to myself, oh my god, how are they going to get through that in this book? She gets through it very easily. It takes her like barely any time to figure everything out and get through that issue, if that makes sense. If you've read it, you know what I'm talking about. And that was something I didn't like. I was really looking forward to see how she's gonna get out of that situation, and it just happened like that in this book. So again, I know it's YA, so maybe for YA readers, Stephanie Garber like wanted this to be easier to read or something. I don't know, but it just didn't give the romance that I wanted. It seemed like everything just happened for Evangeline very easily. Like anything that she wanted was happening, and that was like frustrating as well because I was just like, where is the tension? Why is everything falling into her lap? But I do still love this series. I would say I would give Caraval, the whole series, like a 5 stars, and I would give Once Upon a Broken Heart maybe like a 4 stars as a series, just because of the way this ended. It has me thinking there is no more of Evangeline's story. Like, this is it. Like, this is the end. And that's kind of sad. Like, I wish there was more than just this book, because this book kind of felt like a weird fever dream, just like trying to figure out the situation, and then the book was over. So I don't really know. And then the setup with all the other characters was kind of weird. So I don't know, 4 stars. I do still recommend this trilogy. I'm sure some people love this book. The reason I would recommend this trilogy is because the second book blew me away. Like, I love the second book. I really want to reread it. I would recommend reading this series just for that second book, but I wouldn't expect like a massive, amazing finale for this book. The next book I read was Magnolia Park's Into the Dark. I had to read this book like as soon as I could. It's like 700 pages and she is thick. I love this story. I love these characters. If you like reading toxic drama between rich people, I highly recommend. And I know that doesn't sound very good, like just, oh, toxic drama between rich people, but I swear, like, these characters will have you so emotional, especially when you get to the Daisy Hates books. Basically, you are following Magnolia and BJ's story, and then in Daisy Hates, you're following Daisy's story with her love interest and a third character, which I won't explain who that is because I think it's better if you just go into it yourself. But this book really had me in tears. I actually forgot how the end of Magnolia Park's The Long Way Home was, but I skimmed and went through my tabs in my previous books so that I could prepare, and then I realized what was going on and I was like, oh my god, I have to read this right away. So when I got into it, I was crying a lot. This is very emotional and very deep in comparison to all of the previous books. I don't think any of the previous 4 books were as emotional or as heartbreaking as this one, but I did give this one 4.5 stars, not 5, and the only reason for that is because there was a part of this book that just felt like an extended epilogue of Magnolia's and BJ's story. Basically, the ending of Magnolia Park's The Long Way Home, you're kind of just getting the epilogue of that. That's what this felt like. Like, everything that happened in that book and leading up to the end, those events were just discussed and like happening to the characters throughout all of this. And I still love this book though, like love these characters. That's why it's a 4.5 stars. It definitely wasn't so action-packed and things happening and drama and like arguments and things like that. Like, this book wasn't like the others in that way. I do see why Jessa Hastings did that. I definitely feel like it was time for Magnolia and BJ's story to end, and that's why she said this book was the last one, and it definitely makes sense. I do kind of think this book could have been a bit shorter because, I mean, it's 700 pages and a lot of the time not much was happening. It was basically just like a lot of growth between the characters, and I do love seeing that. So yeah, 4.5 stars, but there are some little crumbs of Daisy's story and her love interest in this book, so not a lot, but if you love Daisy's stories, which I do, I love the Daisy Hates stories as well, then you'll really want to read this and then wait for the next book to come out because there are some crumbs, and now I need the next book because I need to know what's going to happen with Daisy and her life and the other character whose name I won't mention. I need to know what's going to happen. So definitely recommend this one. Loved it. 4.5 stars. So the next book I read was The Younger Wife by Sally Hepworth. This was a very interesting thriller. It's about this wealthy man in his 60s. He marries a younger woman who is the same age as his daughters. They're like all in their 30s. And basically the 2 daughters aren't that happy about this new wife, and their mother is still alive and she's just ill and in a care home. So basically there's a lot of tension and drama surrounding the situation. And basically what happens is, in the very beginning of the book, there's a wedding going on. You're in an unknown person's perspective and someone gets injured or killed at the wedding. You don't know what's going on. You just know that there's drama, the police are called, and someone was rushed to the hospital. And basically the rest of the book is set up to be a year before the wedding, and you're kind of trying to figure out what's the drama, what's gonna happen, who's gonna get injured at the wedding. And so basically, as you're reading it, you're learning all these different things about the different characters. The 2 sisters have very weird habits, and they are kind of explained, but you're basically learning a lot, and then you end up seeing what happens. I think this book was written extremely well, definitely tying in all the different things about each character and how it relates to what the main story is about. Like, that was incredible, and I love the way the author did that. But I gave this book 3 stars just because it wasn't that like mind-blowing. Like, it became very obvious what was going to happen, and then the ending happened and you're like, okay, cool. And then You're just kind of like, cool, the book's over. It was a good thriller. I listened to it as an audiobook while I was in the car driving, and I love listening to audiobooks in the car, especially thrillers. So that was really great, and it was a good for passing the time, but otherwise it was just a 3-star good thriller. I would recommend it to anyone who loves like family drama because of a new wife type of thing. It was very good for that. The next book I read was The Only One Left by Riley Sager. I didn't want to read this for a while. Basically, I read The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager when that book was hyped up for being really popular. That was not a thriller for me. Basically, The House Across the Lake for me kind of felt like watching a horror movie where there's like a very obvious ending that can happen, and it did happen, and it just like really bothered me. But I thought I would give The Only One Left a chance because I heard good things and it sounded really interesting. It caught my attention. There's some like creepy old house, and there's basically this woman. Her name is something Hope. I forgot her name. Basically, this woman, her entire family was slaughtered when she was in her 20s, and everyone blamed her, but there was no evidence to put her in prison. And in the present day, which I think is meant to be like in the 80s or something, she's completely disabled. She had like a stroke, and she's basically like needs a caretaker, and so the caretaker goes and shows up and takes care of this woman, but obviously she's terrified because everyone thinks that she murdered her family, and there is so much drama in trying to solve like the mystery, and it was very well written. Reading this, I was very surprised that it was the same author as The House Across the Lake, because I thought this book was way better. It was like so good, and I was so invested in the story. I was just like, I need to know what the actual story is, what happened, and I did not expect the ending at all. Once you actually find out what happened, I think it will really shock you, or at least shock most people. I gave this book 4 stars. It was incredible. I really liked it. The only reason I didn't give it 5 stars was mainly because our main character, for the first like half of the book, she is petrified to be in this old woman's house, and Riley Sager does a good job of making you feel the fear that the main character is feeling. Like, I definitely felt kind of creeped out and like nervous and afraid, but what really bothered me is that there was no reason for the main character to be afraid. Like I said, the woman that's the patient, she's 70-something, she's completely disabled, and she's had caretakers for years, and there have been no other murders. She supposedly murdered her family when she was like 20, and she's now 70, and in all that time, no one else has ever died. So I just thought the main character being so petrified to be there was just a little excessive, because it really wasn't that big of a deal. Either way, that was just how the author decided to write the main character's perspective, and I'll take it. It was still a wonderful book. I definitely recommend it as an audiobook because it's so intense and dramatic. I highly recommend that one as a thriller. That was so much better than The House Across the Lake. And now I'm more interested to read more Riley Sager books because I kind of swore off him for a while because The House Across the Lake bothered me so much. I was like, I don't want to read anything else like this again. But my curiosity was piqued with his new release. And yeah, now I want to go and read more of his books in case they are just as good as The Only One Left. The next book I read is Gothikana by Runix. Not sure how to pronounce her author name, but I'm gonna say that. Gothikana by Runix. This book, I have seen this on Bookstagram for easily like 2 years. It's described as like a Dracula retelling, and not a retelling, but like the vibes of Dracula. Basically, this book is nothing like Dracula. Don't go into this thinking you're gonna get Dracula because you're not. But I really enjoyed this story. Basically, we have our main character, Corvina, and she has purple eyes, which do matter to the story. She is invited to go to Verenmoor, which is this university, I don't remember where. It's this university that's kind of like in the middle of nowhere in some creepy old building, or I guess massive old building. And she has a roommate, and basically the setup was kind of giving Wednesday vibes, if you know what I mean. A little bit of Wednesday, especially because in Wednesday, the show, the school was called Nevermore, and this one's called Verenmoor? Verenmoor? Yeah, literally the same letters but switched around. So it was really giving Wednesday vibes, except our main character isn't like Wednesday at all. And basically, she has a very attractive professor named Vad. And that's kind of what the book is about. I don't want to go too much into it, but basically there is a lot of mystery at this school. There were murders that happened like a century ago. People are going missing. People are unaliving themselves. And it's a very interesting book. Definitely look up trigger warnings, I would say, if you're sensitive to any topics, because this one, it doesn't go too in depth about the topics, but I can see how reading it might trigger you. So look up the trigger warnings. Also, this book is spicy. Very spicy. I was not expecting this to be spicy at all. I thought it was going to be like some dark gothic read. There's a lot of spice in this book, so if you like spice, I think you'd like it. I don't know where I settle on a rating for this one. I think 3.5 stars is what I'm going to settle on. I really enjoyed it, but the ending just felt a little bit rushed, and I feel like this could have been turned into like a second book and maybe a third book. But the way this ended, I can't see a second book at all, or maybe, but like it was very wrapped up and it just happened so suddenly. Like, I'm not against standalone books, obviously, but it just felt like the author was writing it and then just kind of forced the ending to wrap up. At least that's how I read it, but I really enjoyed the book. I loved the way the characters were with each other. The only thing I will say, I think the reason this is compared to Dracula is because our female main character and the male main character, they kind of have like this intense lust for each other that's out of nowhere. And I've read Dracula, and Dracula isn't really like that, but everyone thinks it is. I don't know how to explain that and make that make sense at all. Basically, there's like this lust going on between them, which seems very physical, but it's more than that, because like they deeply care for each other, but it's based off of nothing. They're just strangers. So I don't really know how to explain how that makes sense, and it's kind of like they were destined to love each other. So it's very interesting, but I did really enjoy it. I love how protective he is over her, and I love how she's so like wrapped up in him as well. Like, it was a really great story. I just wish that the ending didn't wrap up the way that it did, and that we could have got like a second book or something like that. So yeah, otherwise I love this one. It was really great. 3.5 stars. And so the last book that I read at the end of this quarter, so that I finished in March, was The Assassin's Blade by Sarah J. Maas. I really want to read the Throne of Glass series. I read Throne of Glass in October of 2022, I think, so it's been a while, and I barely remember anything from that book. All I know is that it was a 5 stars and I loved it, and I've since read the entire ACOTAR series and I love that series, so I want to read the entire Throne of Glass series, and I decided to start this time with The Assassin's Blade just because my friend is reading it right now, and she read Throne of Glass, Crown of Midnight, and then The Assassin's Blade, I think. And she was saying that because of how the Crown of Midnight ended, she was really impatient to get to Heir of Fire, and like she wasn't really caring that much about this book. So I thought, okay, maybe let me read this first before I read Throne of Glass again, and we'll see. This book took me by surprise. This is basically a collection of 4 or 5 novellas. Okay, 5 novellas. It's 5 novellas, but they're all in order. So the first novella happens and you're like, okay, got that story. And then when you go into the next one, it's kind of like reference that she went through what happened in the first novella to get to the second one. And it's basically like that until you get to the end. The ending of this book, I was not expecting. Like, I thought something completely different was gonna happen, and I don't want to say what it is because obviously it's a spoiler, but what did happen just blew my mind. I really wasn't expecting that, and I cannot believe that I read Throne of Glass without knowing what happened in this book, because this book is literally the events leading up to how Throne of Glass begins, and you definitely can read Throne of Glass without reading this one first, but I'm currently like 100 pages into Throne of Glass, and there have been so many little references to this entire collection of novellas. Like, I can't even imagine how I read that before and didn't even understand any of it, but like reading this first, I'm just still trying to understand how she's able to go through that next trials and series. So I don't want to say too much, but like I would recommend reading this first. universe, at least right now. I have not read Crown of Midnight or any of the books after that, so but just based on reading Throne of Glass first and then reading this book and now going back into Throne of Glass, I would recommend reading this first. But I really love this one. I would give it 4 stars, and the main reason I give it 4 stars is just because the first 2 novellas, you're kind of not really getting much. You're getting plot and story and events, but nothing like too much going on. So it did make the book feel kind of slow. Basically, the 3rd novella, where more intense stuff happens, is page 117. So I'd say then, like, yeah, the first 117 pages of this book just felt kind of slow and not boring, but you're just not understanding why you're reading this. You're like, okay, so our main character is going here, doing this, doing that, and you're just kind of like, okay, so what's gonna happen next? And then all of a sudden the novella ended and you're now thrown into another story. So that's why this is 4 stars and not 5 stars, but again, they are novellas, so it makes sense. There's usually not a lot of plot in novellas, but collectively, I feel like instead of novellas, she could have like tied the ending of each novella into the beginning of the next novella, and this could have just been like a whole book, which I guess it is. I mean, it's published as a whole book, but like, I don't know how to explain that. Like, I just didn't understand the reason for the breaks in between novellas. Like, she could have just written this as a full flowing story and it would have been amazing, especially because of that ending that I wasn't ready for. So yeah, this one was 4 stars. I really loved it, and I'm so excited to continue the series, and I'm rereading Throne of Glass right now, and I cannot wait to get through it. So those are the 9 books that I have read so far in all of 2024. If you've read any of these, let me know down below what your thoughts are. Let me know if you're interested in reading any of them, and if you have stuck around, thank you so much for sticking around. I'm glad to be back in a way. Not promising a schedule, but I am glad to be back, and I'm looking forward to posting more content and being able to interact with you guys again. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.